Good evening. In this broadcast, the program Time. In the next 2 days, it's completely possible that it will be calm in Chechnya. Today, from 0000 hours, the agreement on ceasefire will take effect, which was reached by the Colonel General Anatoly Kulikov and the head of the Dudaev staff, Aslan Maskhadov. The result of the talks is not bad. However, the pessimism of many observers and military is understandable, who note that after the first round of talks, the agreement was that there should be no fighting from heavy weapons. Last night, there was shooting nonetheless. The dialogues began today, not far before midday at the airport in Ingushetia, which neighbors with Chechnya. Just as Monday, the commander of the federal forces in Chechnya, the Colonel General Anatoly Kulikov, and the head of the staff of the Dudaev forces, Aslan Maskhadov, were speaking. About the terms of the ceasefire, nothing was known at the time this material was being prepared. Evidently, there will be some clarity shed on the matter in the press conference planned for evening. But the people in Chechnya, as if having had a premonition of the ceasefire, today, this very morning, were heading for Grozny, although we must admit the city is a sad spectacle. Water hasn't been restored to all regions yet, but water tank vehicles regularly deliver it to residential quarters. Mobile regiments of the Ministry of Emergency Situations are clearing the rubble. The Ministry of Internal Affairs units are combing yards, searching for partisan groups promised by Dudaev. But either they've left the city or they've decided for now to stop combat. Representatives of federal forces are attempting to contact the councils of elders of several populated points of Chechnya, justifiably presuming that this will help to avoid bloodshed in the near future and in the more distant perspective. Evidently, the quick departure of all the federal forces is not foreseen from here. They've even set up their own newspaper under the name Defender of the Homeland. The first issue appeared today. The result of today's talks with the Chechen military was summarized by the Colonel General Anatoly Kulikov in Mozdok. There will be no Chechen war, in his opinion. He announced his proposal to create in Grozny a demilitarized zone. This proposal is being studied by the Chechen side. We propose to remove from the city of Grozny the armed forces of the Ministry of Defense fully and situate them beyond the limits of the city, leaving in the city only the internal forces and the federal militia, and also representatives of the local population together with this militia, if a territorial body is not created. We don't oppose if among these representatives there would be unarmed people from other populated points so that they could become convinced and see for themselves what kind of work is underway in the city. Meanwhile, in Moscow, talks were also held on the Chechnya topic. Viktor Chernomyrdin met with the heads of the Muslims of Russia. The Muslims of Russia are for a peaceful resolution of the Chechen conflict, stated the clerics to the Prime Minister. Muslim leaders suggested to Chernomyrdin after the end of the holy fast of the Muslims' Ramadan to hold a peace conference in Makhachkala or Nazran. Its aim is to stop the bloodshed in Chechnya. In the opinion of the clerics, the conference should gather not only other Muslims. The invitation to participate was sent already to the Patriarch of all Russia and the heads of Judaic community. Viktor Chernomyrdin supported the idea of holding a conference. According to him, the first thing to do now is to apply all efforts to stop the bloodshed. Apart from that, Viktor Chernomyrdin also said at the meeting that he is prepared to facilitate the extension of the ceasefire in Chechnya until between the 3rd and 5th of March, until the end of the holy month Ramadan, in the event, of course, that the Chechen side abides by the terms of the ceasefire. The State Duma today supported the steps of the military to end the military operation and exchange prisoners of war in Chechnya. The deputies adopted a corresponding resolution in detail a little later about this, but now we continue the overview of events connected with the Chechen conflict. Subdivisions of the border troops of Russia were attacked near the village Bursuka on the territory of Ingushetia. The attack was deflected. This was not the first attack on border troops who are protecting the administrative border between Chechnya and Ingushetia. Border troops of the Russian Federal Border Services appeared on the administrative border of Chechnya in the middle of December. They positioned themselves on the fringes defined as their zone of responsibility, 2 in Dagestan and 1 in Ingushetia. Border troops were not involved in combat operations, but only strengthened their positions in these zones. Attention of the Dudaev supporters was directed to the defense of Grozny. Now the situation has changed, and evidently by the end of February, in the opinion of the border troops, taking advantage of the dialogue on truce, gunmen will begin to storm the border. Now they are only testing it out. Friday, shooting of border outposts began, and groups of gunmen appeared in the bordering towns. On Saturday, Sunday, and on Monday, the epicenter of this tension was on the collective farm Asinsky. There are casualties among the peaceful population. It seems the gunmen have lost their chance. The border troops managed to sufficiently entrench themselves in these places, and propaganda worked with the population, and the behavior of the border troops inspired trust toward them among the majority. Each night there is intense shooting. There's sniping during the day. The Cossack village Asminskaya, there the bunkers are left by the Soviet Army, the strategic missile forces, and 1,500 gunmen have based themselves with a large arsenal, ammunition, and amount of food. At night, they conduct their marauding raids from that location. Today, it's exactly 1 year since the agreement was signed between Russia and Tatarstan. This document didn't allow the constitutional conflict to develop into an armed conflict as happened in Chechnya. This is the opinion of the member of the Presidential Council, Emil Payan, expressed to Tatas. The president of Tatarstan, Mintimir Shamiev, unlike Dudaev, worked on political stability in his republic, and for 3 years worked toward the signing of a two-sided agreement with Russia, making compromises in doing so. Dudaev, however, kept the residents of Chechnya all these years in a state of mobilization, although an agreement similar to the Tatarstan one Russia had offered to Chechnya much earlier. Boris Yeltsin was prepared to personally meet with Johar Dudaev in the first half of last year. This, the journalist was told by the president of Tatarstan, Mintimir Shamiev, remembering a personal conversation with the president of Russia. He was very concerned for the Chechen matters, and he literally said that, probably, he said, I will have to meet with Dudaev. He was prepared for this, but it happened that later, not 10 days had passed, when very harsh statements were made through sources of mass media by Johar Dudaev, bordering even on personal insult against the president of Russia. It's difficult to say what the reason was for this reaction of Grozny, but one thing is clear: unlike Dudaev, Mintimir Shamiev found a common language with the center and concluded mutually beneficial agreement about dividing powers between Moscow and Kazan, the anniversary of which is celebrated today. Immediately after the signing of the agreement, in Tatarstan, elections were held for the Federal Assembly of Russia, and all basic contradictions were almost resolved. Today, together with the agreement, 12 intergovernmental agreements were signed, which are successfully implemented now. Tatarstan is not a subsidized republic, and since last year we resolved all taxation issues. As of today, the Ministry of Finances of the Russian Federation has no complaints or claims against Tatarstan. The experience of new regional integration, President Shamiev feels, is very successful. There are no political disagreements between Russia and Tatarstan. About one more anniversary, this day, 6 years ago, the Russian forces left Afghanistan. Despite how this date will be celebrated in the future, the day of the return of the last Soviet soldier from Afghanistan and the topic of international aid will be discussed for a long time, at least by those who saw all the horrors of the war, which eventually was labeled senseless and criminal. And yet, with each year, the reminder of the word Afghanistan evokes more contemplation, as a rule not unanimous and often connected with pain. 6 years ago, did the brothers in insurrection think that the word patriot and patriotism would almost become swear words? On the expenses of a great power, there would be their own Afghanistans which would flare up. And, of course, Chechnya is not Afghanistan. It's an inexorable part of the territory of Russia on which, for to date unclear reasons, for more than 3 years, its laws were not in effect. As a result, Russians found themselves drawn into a bloody tragedy in which Russian soldiers and officers are being called occupiers and aggressors. Incidentally, I, as a witness of Afghan events, would like to remind you that despite all the costs in the aid to the Afghans, we left this country, yet not as despised enemies. These bearded old men and children were not sent out under the threat of guns to bid farewell to the Shurayi. This is how we were called then, the Soviets. Yes, we left Afghanistan not as conquerors, but with the sense of having fulfilled our military duty, thinking that at home there would be serious tasks ahead. However, today many soldiers and officers burned by the Afghan war find themselves on different sides of the barricades, and not only in the new sovereign states. In Russia itself, the Afghan vets find no common language often in respect to perhaps that same Chechen conflict. Not defending certain representatives of our military who unconditionally did not do everything so as to normally, from the point of view of a military person, to conduct this operation professionally. Nonetheless, not everything depends on the military, of course. They should have prepared properly for the beginning of this operation, because if a decision was adopted to conduct a forceful operation, this should have been approached in a more solid fashion. And when they approach the resolution of a large problem, mildly speaking, hurriedly, well, then you have the results. But we didn't rush for an entire 3 years and then suddenly. I'm only surprised about one thing. Why has Dudayev and his entourage been placed on the same level with all the people who live in Chechnya? Why must the people answer for this Dudayev and for his immediate circle? Why must the people pay for this? Not only the Chechen people, but the rest as well. So we have again concluded that the experience is a great thing, and it should be studied extensively. Not only the Afghan, yes, not only the Afghan experience, but the Afghan one as well. And again about the problems of federal structure, but this time not within the framework of Russian borders. We're speaking of Moldova. I'll remind you that the relations were extremely strained between Chisinau and Tiraspol by the decision to withdraw the 14th Army from Pridnestrovia, which will be accompanied by the sale of part of the arms to the Moldavian side. Pridnestrovian leaders immediately declared the property of the 14th Army their own property, and here's the meeting of the two leaders. A unique prologue for the current Pridnestrovian summit was this morning's opening in Tiraspol of the monument to the soldiers who didn't return from the Afghan war. Participants of the ceremony exhorted politicians to apply all efforts to prevent further bloody conflicts. At the dialogues, which occurred under the aegis of Russia and the OSCE, a package of documents was submitted encompassing the entire spectrum of two-sided relations. However, from the very beginning, discussion was concentrated on the question of the status of Pridnestrovia. Tiraspol leaders insisted that Chisinau confirmed the national status of Pridnestrovia within the framework of Moldova, which was established jointly with the declaration adopted in April of last year. However, the Moldavian side refused to consider this document as a basis for further dialogue and offered to examine only the question about granting Pridnestrovia autonomous status. In the opinion of observers, the progress of the current dialogues was complicated by serious disputes of the sides on the problem of the withdrawal of the 14th Army and the division of its property. As is known, Pridnestrovia, on the territory of which Russian forces are located, categorically opposes their withdrawal and the transfer of weapons and combat technology to Moldova. In Azerbaijan, the internal political situation is growing complicated, and this, as previously, is connected with Nakhichevan, which is providing refuge to the retired leader of the state. Since the beginning of the year, the situation escalated in the Nakhichevan Autonomous Republic, and this is said in the letter of the law enforcement organs of the autonomy published in mass media. In it, it specified that the destabilization of the situation occurs because of the law violations by individuals who are acting here under the guise of the personal security for the former president of Azerbaijan, Bihos Alchibey, who for more than 1.5 years lives here in this area in Nakhichevan. In the last while, they have twice attacked local police, seizing firearms from the law enforcement officials. At the session of the National Assembly, several opposition deputies stated that they are alarmed over rumors of an impending operation on disarmament, which could lead to bloodshed. Responding to inquiries of deputies, the Minister of Internal Affairs of the Republic, Ramil Usubov, reminded about the known decree of the President of Azerbaijan about the importance of disarming unlawful armed formations operating on the territory of the country. At the same time, the head of the political department emphasized that this operation won't be launched until such time that the security of Elchibey is provided for. For the neighbors in Yerevan today, there's an urgent occurrence. The builders of the monument of genocide of the Armenian people unexpectedly became victims of an accident which occurred at the construction site. It's 80 years this year since the terrible tragedy in the history of the Armenian people. The 24th of April, 1965, on the National Day of Mourning on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of genocide, in the Yerevan Park Etizani Kadert, the eternal flame first was lit up. In this area, on the territory of the memorial, a museum was to open dedicated to the black pages of the carnage and violence. It was here, at the construction site, a tragedy occurred. For yet unclear reasons, the steel concrete covering of the first floor collapsed with an area of 240 square meters. Two installers who were there at the time died under the rubble. The concrete workers and masons working ahead did not suffer. One was taken to hospital with a broken leg. The covering on the future Act Hall of the museum was of a slotted type, and possibly this is one of the versions why the steel fittings didn't endure the weight of the uneven concrete load. A special commission which was set up is pursuing other versions of the occurrence as well. Despite the tragedy which occurred and the extensive damage, construction workers continue their work. On the 24th of April, the Museum of the History of the Genocide of Armenians, 1915, will undoubtedly host its first visitors. And again, about the internal Russian policies, Boris Yeltsin today congratulated Vladimir Tumanov with his election to the post of chairman of the Constitutional Court of the Russian Federation. The head of state also assured the judges of the Constitutional Court that will, as a guarantor of the Constitution, in all ways pursue an unwavering and precise execution of all decisions of the Constitutional Court by all organs of state rule, officials and subjects of the Russian Federation. In the Constitutional Court of the Russian Federation, today a press conference was held, the first after the membership of the court became complete, and so the highest arbitrary organ of the country is ready to begin its work. The court will examine its first case in March. Which case will be chosen for examination is not known yet. The membership of the court is divided into two chambers, which will allow to increase its effectiveness. The personnel structure of the chambers was not announced today. As was said to the journalists, the cases of special importance the Constitutional Court will review at a plenary session in full membership. We most likely first will examine such cases whose delay in examination will threaten with irreversible negative repercussions for human rights. Vladimir Tumanov, responding to questions, answered that he and his colleagues will act strictly in accordance with the law on the Constitutional Court, and not a single judge belongs to any political party, including that so-called presidential party. Tomorrow, the President will deliver his address to the Federal Assembly. This document will be a unique generalization of the reformationists' ideas of the best minds in Russia. This is the opinion of the top aide of the President, Viktor Ilyushin. A correspondent of TASS clarified that Boris Yeltsin intends to give firm guarantees for elections to be held in Russia for Parliament and President within the time that's set by the Constitution. Ivan Rybkin said to his colleagues today at the Duma session that the President offered the deputies to discuss his message of tomorrow, not at a joint session of the chambers, but separately. Deputies of the State Duma supported the first steps of the command of the United Group of Federal Forces in Chechnya and the commander of the armed forces to cease fire and exchange prisoners of war. The State Duma, it's noted in the resolution, is prepared to actively participate in the peace process. At the press conference, Sergei Shapovalov and Vladimir Lysenko, representing the Committee on Federative Affairs, supported the idea of a round table on peaceful restoration of Chechnya, a type of a peaceful public conference, and the draft appeal to the Constitutional Court by the Democratic Party of Russia on examining the constitutionality of the resolution of the government to deploy forces in Chechnya was declined. At the same time, the Duma assessed as a provocational move the statement of the National Assembly of Estonia regarding the right of the Chechen people for self-definition, and views it as an attempt to prompt the government of Estonia to interfere in the internal matters of Russia. According to the law adopted in the third reading on television and radio, broadcasting will be permitted by licenses issued by the Federal Commission, and incidentally, this will be done on a tender or competition basis. Lively discussion erupted over the amendment to the law on weapons, especially the correction of the faction LDPR permitting possession of weapons by deputies of the Federal Assembly. The attempt to arm the deputies is some sort of a blasphemous, monstrous thought, will lead to the fact that we will bring all the sediments of our society to being armed. The amendments were declined. Today, in the Russian parliament, there was no time to discuss the draft law on the battle with organized crime. According to reports of the last months and these last days, this law is acquiring a priority significance for Russia. Crimes which are occurring within Russian borders, in near and distant abroad, often can be filed within a singular chain. This leads to very sad conclusions. Our correspondent tells you about it. This unique catch amazed even the operational teams. More than 40 kilograms of diamonds, that's 200,000 carats, were confiscated by members of the Investigative Committee of Internal Affairs of Russia. The operation was aided by colleagues from the main Department on Organized Crime of Internal Affairs and the Federal Service of Counterintelligence. The initial value of the jewels is several $million. The 6 people have been detained. All of them are businessmen. This organized group is accused of conducting unlawful deals with currency valuables in especially large proportion. 2 million carats of cut diamonds 4 years ago were received by sectoral ministries for scientific purposes. The loss of government control over precious stones allowed such people to carry on theft without being caught for a long time. Much was lost to criminal business. Therefore, a strict state monopoly on mining and cutting and sale of precious stones is needed. This is truly hard currency. In Khabarovsk, another window into Europe was opened. There, a new complex of international digital communications began to operate: Russia, Japan, South Korea. Today in Khabarovsk, with the participation of the first Vice Premier of the government of Russia, Oleg Soskovets, a complex of international digital communications was opened between Russia, Japan, and South Korea. After the official ceremony, Oleg Soskovets held a direct video connection meeting with representatives of the governments of Japan and South Korea. The system of optic fiber communications in Russia has been being installed since 1993. Already open is the channel Moscow, Petersburg, Copenhagen. In December, it's planned to open the line Moscow-Khabarovsk, and in the first quarter of 1996, Moscow-Novorossiysk, Tambov-Paler. This locks an international circle in digital communications around the globe. Overall, the federal program of digital communications foresees to increase the number of international channels to 48,000. The increase as of today in the fares on passenger tickets by exactly 2 times has cautioned many potential clients of the railways. We asked our correspondent to clarify the situation. The fares on railway routes was a very simple procedure. The fares were decreased on cargo shipments over long distances by 50%, and naturally fares were risen for passenger trips. The matter is that they were always unprofitable and compensated through cargo routes. Now the Ministry of Roads and Transportation has cut its compensation greatly, although if you speak of company trains, prices today have increased by only 20%. If previously the tariff was increased, we felt it immediately, the decline immediately, and cut down on our routes, and now on the contrary, we are designating for Friday another train. However, to the dissatisfaction of the Ministry of Roads and Transportation, cost of the fare on suburban trains in Moscow and Petersburg remains unchanged. So it was 10 kilometers that cost 60 rubles. To date, we continue at that rate to transport our passengers. For the passengers, it's good. Yes, and for us, the railway people, it's also good, and at one time it was, but now it's not justified because our routes on the suburban lines are free of charge. Specialists feel that the current increase on tariffs on railways is not a simple mechanical one. Slowly but surely, service is improving. New wagons were purchased, and decent meals are being organized en route and at stations. At the Belarusian terminal, for instance, now passengers are provided with full service, selling tickets for any part of the world and back, even to organizing various tourist trips, not only on trains, but automobiles and airplanes. And how much more can be invented? That's how much more we'll have to pay. Chechen events will end sooner or later, and then the time to restore the destroyed will come. In Moscow, at the press conference, it was said that the efforts of one country are insufficient. Therefore, Russian banks, including Minotep Bank, plan to help restore the economy of Chechnya. Our bank is an authorized bank of the government of Ingushetia, but when the situation in Chechnya stabilizes, I think Minotep Bank, as many other financial structures, will participate in restoring the destroyed industry of Chechnya. And this is completely realistic because the bank is increasing the size of its basic fund from 40 to 100 billion rubles. For this, another fifth emission of stock is being conducted. 60 million voting shares is being offered with a nominal value of 1,000 rubles. It's planned that a significant package of shares of the last issue will be bought by the government, which will receive a privileged shareholder status. The enormous, until late, company Aeroflot splintered into 400 individual joint stock companies, and their fates vary in commercial activities. An exclusion is the Aeroflot International Russian airline, for now, which last year realized a great profit. This year, it managed to prepare with foreign partners several new mutually beneficial agreements. The first of them was with Ireland. The majority of our flights from Sheremetyevo to America are done with a landing for refueling in Shannon. To be able to service the American continent, our aviation passed through this city in Ireland. During the years of cooperation, here a major transportation hub developed, which has a lengthy runway, not intimidated in unfavorable weather because it has its own heating system. And the navigation services here are among the most contemporary in the world. But the collapse of the USSR and its enormous airline led to a decrease in the number of flights. This was immediately exploited by Western competitors who laid routes through other airports. Therefore, the Minister of Transportation of Ireland, Mr. Laurie, opens a conference dedicated to the 50th anniversary of Shannon, especially noted the importance of a new agreement with our airline, Aeroflot, Russian International Airline. The General Director, Tikhonov, said, "We, for the first time, are beginning to use such a system of operations as a transit basis on foreign territory. There has been no such agreement in the history of our civil aviation. Here, Aeroflot planes will be based for technical servicing, and the main thing is for a fuel up, with our fuel brought here to this dock by Russian tankers." This agreement opens a possibility for airlines from the Baltic and CIS countries. Their planes will shuttle to Shannon. Passengers will transfer onto Russian or other airlines which will be flying to other countries of the American continent. We just received news now from Taiwan. At these very moments, a major restaurant complex is on fire there. According to the last reports, around 70 people have died. The reasons for the fire for now are not known. The authorities are undertaking special measures in order to save the people who are still in the building. The address of the President Yeltsin to the Federal Assembly, which, as you know, will be held tomorrow, is being prepared for in the United States as well. Our personal correspondent reports from Washington that the imminent address has activated not only supporters but also opponents on Clinton's policy toward the Russian direction. This letter, with 60 signatures, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, will receive today. It was sent from Congress. The author of this letter is Tim Romer. He's not an ordinary citizen, but a member of the House of Representatives from the state of Indiana. The war in Chechnya contradicts American interests, domestic and foreign policy interests, asserts Congressman Romer. In his letter, he urges Clinton to boycott the planned summit in Moscow in May if the war in Chechnya is not put an end to. To the question on what terms, we were not answered. The letter, which was to demonstrate to Clinton and through him to Yeltsin the concern of Congress, evidently is too late. A telephone call from the White House to the Kremlin on Monday, unlike a written message, is assessed as a signal of cautious support on the eve of the President of Russia's address to Parliament, but this is not the end of discussion. The question is, should we give cause to be given to local press, to local pessimists? Does this concern questions of war and peace, or is it a far more prosaic matter? The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Andrei Kozyrev, and his colleague from Great Britain, Douglas Hurd, are connected not only with distant joint political activity in the international arena, but friendly relations. Lately, both ministers evidently felt an urgent need for a personal, unofficial meeting, and since it took place late in the evening in Stockholm during the one-day business visit of Andrei Kozyrev to Sweden. The journalists were allowed only to be present at the handshake ceremony. The results were learned today personally from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia. According to him, they discussed the broadest circle of questions, from violation of the ceasefire in Bosnia to the actions of the UN forces, to broadening the NATO bloc and Russian-British relations. Naturally, in the conversation, they touched on a topic which could negatively affect these mutual relations. That is the fate of our personal correspondent in London, Alexander Malikov. In general, I said and I'm saying to the English that they shouldn't indulge in all these espionage passions. They do have a bit of a primitive approach, I would say, that is, the special services, but let's hope that we will manage to regularize this issue. I count somehow on English pragmatism. And the majority of the military British pragmatics are in the Czech Republic now. For the first time in the last half-century, a joint Czech-English maneuver, Libna 1995, is being held in the southern Czech Republic. Politicians are particularly concerned with the success of this undertaking because they view it as one of the serious steps on the path of the country's entry into NATO. Regular citizens these days are attracted by another spectacle, reminding them of quite recent ties in Prague with yet another neighbor from the east. I'll say honestly, for a long time I haven't seen such an abundance of marvelous Soviet chauffeured vehicles as in this hangar in the Prague River Port. 13 Chaikas and 3 Zils, which at one time belonged to the heads of the government and party of Czechoslovakia, were exhibited for an open auction by a local firm which wished to remain anonymous. Evidently, it managed to cheaply acquire these limousines after the collapse of the communist regime and its leaders, those same ones who used to get around in them. And here is an armored Zil 114, which Comrade Brezhnev gave at one time to Comrade Guzik. It's known that the use of such a Soviet automobile was a sign of membership in the highest party elite and also unfaltering loyalty to its older brother. Incidentally, all these historical antiques are still drivable. Their mileage is quite low. Initially, the collection of automobiles was offered in the auction in its entirety for 20 million krones, some $700,000. When there were no offers, the Zils and Chaikas were auctioned off individually, like the 12 chairs which Ostap Bender was after. The starting price for the vehicle of Guzik was $47,000. There were no buyers. And the auction was quite feeble in general. Only 4 limousines were sold. 3 of them were acquired by Pan Stegle, the director and owner of the metallurgical plant Polziklada. They will be useful, as he explained, for his trips to Russia and Ukraine, where his firm has its business and interests. And for those roads, such vehicles are needed. They will endure everything, said the new owner of the former party property. With this, that's all the information I have. Ahead of you is the sports overview. Hello, my friends. The 7th match of the semifinals of the rivals for the World Championship title in chess in the FIDE version between Boris Gelfand from Belarus and the Russian Anatoly Karpov was postponed in the equal position. I'll remind you for now the score is 3.5 by 2.5 for the world champion. Today, the first finalist became known. He is the American Gato Kamsky, ending his 7th match with the Russian Valery Salov in a tie in the 24th move, and became the early winner. I'll remind you the score of the match, 5.5 by 1.5 points for Kamsky. High results were shown yesterday in Moscow at the International Track and Field Competition's Russian Winter. At the 5-kilometer distance, Mikhail Shedikov, with a fantastic result, won. This is a new world record. I prepared for this meet. What can I say? I was heading in this direction, so in principle it turned out. I'm just lucky. At the distance of 110 meters with hurdles, holding the world's top achievement is the American Alan Johnson. His result is 13.34 seconds. He has improved the record of 13 years set by the Finn Bruggar. In Sweden, the World Swimming competitions continue on the 50-meter backstroke distance. As yesterday in the 100-meter, competing were the World Cup holders Vladimir Selenkov from Volgograd, the world record holder American Jeff Rose. The American is again first. On the 19th of February, in Raminsky, the best racers of Russia will compete, auto racers that is, and not among them will be the 3-time rally champion of the USSR, Vlad Shpik, the talented athlete, wonderful man. He left us at the height of his strength after serious illness. Today in Moscow, another round of the Russian Championships began in mini soccer. The most tense match this day was between Minka and Visk. The score was 3-3. Using this, the leader of the championships, Dino, beat the Luch 15-2, moving even further ahead of its pursuers. Good evening. Today is the meeting of our Lord, the meeting of winter and spring. The current weather has for a long time been spring-like. A powerful Atlantic cyclone, as previously, brings warm air to the European parts of Russia. In the Republic of Komi, under the influence of an atmospheric front which is moving to the northeast, it will be cloudy with some snowfalls during the day. In the west of Komi, around 0. In the northeast, around -8 to 13. In the Murmansk and Arkhangelsk districts, from 0 to -5. In Karelia and the Leningrad district, 0 plus 5. In the Baltic countries, under the influence of atmospheric fronts, rain with some patches of light snow, gusty winds, temperatures of plus 2 to 7. In Belarus, in the zone of those same fronts, light rain will fall, but there will be fewer clouds during the day, sun will shine, and the air will be as warm as plus 3 to 8 degrees. In Ukraine and Moldova, the weather is quite calm, but the sky basically will be covered by low cloud cover, temperature through the night and day from plus 2 to 7 degrees. In the central and central Chernozem regions, it will be partly cloudy without precipitation. At night, 0 minus 3, during the day, up to plus 5 degrees. In the Rostov district, tomorrow it will be variably cloudy with some brief periods of rain. In Rostov-on-the-Don, plus 2 to 4. In the Northern Caucasus, cloudy with patches of fog and drizzle. During the day, in Chechnya and Ingushetia, plus 3 to 6. In Northern Ossetia, Dagestan, plus 5 to 8 degrees. Beyond the Caucasus, under the influence of an atmospheric front, it's cloudy with some isolated light precipitation. Georgia, Azerbaijan, plus 8 to 13. In Armenia, around 0. On the Black Sea coast, brief periods of rain, temperatures around Sochi, plus 15 degrees. In St. Petersburg, it will be cloudy with some rain mixed with snow. Winds are from the southeast and gusty, at night around 0, during the day, plus 2 to 4 degrees. In Moscow and suburbs, variably cloudy skies without much precipitation. In the morning, there will be patches of fog. Winds are from the southwest, 5 to 10 meters per second. At night, around 0 during the day, and in the suburbs, down to minus 3 during the day, plus 1 to 3. The forecast was compiled according to the data from the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia. All the best.